Namaste and a warm welcome to Saranga. The death of Stan Sami opens a can of worms. It's blown into a full-size political drama. Several narratives have been thrown around as if his death was unnatural and he was murdered by the state and so on and so forth. Now, those narratives do not need much attention, in my opinion, because Mr. Sami, his life was not cut short. He lived his life. He lived for 84 years, which is really good. Now, I'm not saying that people must die at 84. If it was in my hands, I would want everybody to live to 100. That's besides the point. He died of cardiac arrest. Now, cardiac arrest cannot be initiated by the state. We all know that. And during this pandemic, we have seen many deaths. And we don't get to hear such narratives about anybody else. Why is that so? Is it because it doesn't fetch us any political benefits or religio-political benefits, so to say? We have to look into the life of Mr. Sami to understand the activity that his order is involved in. And what do I mean by his order? I mean the Jesuit order. And by his order, I also mean liberation theology. So we have with us today Robert Rosario Garu. Welcome to the show, Rosario Garu. My first question would be,
to begin with, there is some manipulation in the name itself. He's basically a Tamilian. His original name was Stanislaus Lud Sami. So in that Stanislaus, only Stan remained, rest is removed, and that is not very unnatural. People do that, shortcut their name. That's okay. But this Swami, this Lud Sami became Swami. That's a part of manipulation, I believe, because even if you remove Lud from Sami, only Sami, S-A-M-Y remains. But he has become Swami, S-W-A-M-Y. So why is it so? Because to fetch the very, his target group in his, working place in Jharkhand. To the Hindus, how do you convince? By calling Swami. Then by some virtue of your name, you get some advantage there. Even before coming to his death, he was arrested last year, a few months back. Since then, this narrative has started. It's not now, but it has blown beyond proportions in his death. And it was expected. As a political activist myself, it's not surprising me. It has surprised many people like, but it has not surprised me because my analysis and my understanding of political narratives, what I have been saying openly for the past few years, people are not believing. Now you are bound to believe because all the connections are in the open now. When I said earlier, there is a connection between Maoists and church, people are saying, oh, what are you saying? Now it is coming to the fore openly. Earlier when I said, behind every political narrative I'm saying in this country, there is church. At least the brain behind it is the church. People are saying, no, you are talking too much. But now it is coming out in the open. And their connections with all sorts of political establishments or the so-called Breaking India forces or the Maoists or the jihadi forces. So everything is coming out in the open because they can't hide anymore. It has come in the open. So I don't need to provide you proof about their connections anymore. It's there in the open. Yeah, as you rightly said, he died at the age of 84. Now let me tell you, where did he die? His place of death. He did not die in the jail. Now what is the narrative created? It was a judicial killing. Just see these words, how strong words they are using. What do you mean by judicial killing or custodial killing? So that means the person, when it is called custodial killing, when a person dies in police custody, because of the torture of the police. That is called custodial death. This man was not in the police custody. He was not even in the jail. But technically, there is a technical term. It is called judicial custody because person is under the judicial custody. It's only a technical term. But practically, he was never in the jail. Never in the jail in the sense during his time or just prior to his death. He was not in the jail. He was very much in the custody of a hospital, and that too a hospital run by whom? By the church again. A church, nuns run Holy Family Hospital, Bandra, Mumbai. He was admitted there. So he was very much in the custody of the church itself or the church run hospital itself. So in no way he was for practical purpose, he was no way with the political custody or judicial custody or police custody. So there he dies, and there they create, see the audacity. You know, church has the guts and the audacity to such a narrative that a person died in their own hospital could be termed as judicial killing. This is the height of something. Why should the UN interfere at all? This again confirms my earlier, what I said earlier, that whatever becomes international propaganda, so church is behind it. Whatever anti-India forces speak across the world, the connecting force across the globe is the church. This was my study for years. Now it has confirmed again. Otherwise, US has no business to speak. Stan Swamy was accused of his links with the Naxalites, direct or indirect links with the Naxalite. And such a person dying, how can it be a blot on the human rights? Because he himself was a violator of human rights. What was he doing? He was promoting violence. He was promoting those who are killing innocent people, innocent lives. He was promoting them, and his death cannot be a human rights violation. Rather, it should be a celebration for human rights activists, because a person who promoted innocent killing is gone. And see one more thing now. Okay, what are they saying? He was a messiah of the tribals in Jharkhand. You know, he worked for the poor Messiah. Now, when he died, what is the obvious position you see? The obvious thing is the person whom he was working, or whom he considered as their godfather, they should be crying, isn't it? The very people who have lost him should be crying. But do you see any of the tribals crying now? You see the entire media, no tribal, no poor person is crying. You don't see anywhere. You don't hear their voice at all. But who is crying on the contrary? These political, crying all coming from political setups. Why is it so? If he was really a messiah of the poor, they should be crying. Now, why are they not crying? That proves he was, his service to the poor is just a eyewash. His major agenda was, I would say in one word, we can say it is breaking India forces. That that links between Marxism and Christianity is in India. I see it more of a development in India rather than in the West. In the West they fight each other, but in India they come together. This is again a political strategy. See, all over the world, Christians and Muslims fight. They are on the opposite side, but in India they are together. And communists and church, they are fighting all over the world. They are opposite sides. In India, they are together. This is a political alignment. I would say it's again a master strategy by the church. It's a political alignment. Again, it has got nothing to do with the spirituality, religion, for the purpose of politics. So, what strategy they have to use for Indian context? This is what they are doing it. And I would term it as a change of strategy. What they were doing earlier, neither that was with a fully with the good intention. The niyat, you say, no, the niyat were neither clear there nor here. It was just a strategy. What they were doing earlier, what you said, spiritual need, that was that had to do nothing with spirituality. That again was a political agenda. Right from the beginning, church's very purpose is political. And this sending to heaven and after the life after death and all these things are just to manipulations. And the service, what the church does, I can puncture all their service claims. With courage, I'm saying this. After studying all their service models, I say it is just like, to catch a fish. You throw hooks, no? You put some food there in the hooks. So some fish eat and go away. Some fish are caught in the hook. So those fish who eat and go away, do you call you have done service to those fishes? Correct, no? So this is what the church has been doing earlier. Earlier it was through, on the garb of religion, spirituality. As the things change, they need to change the strategy. So I purely see it as a change in strategy. It was political earlier, it is political now. Now it should these people, Indian people, it's not easy to convince them to vote in a certain way. They have tried for a long time. I have been seeing from 1977, they cried foul whenever the Congress government fell. Then 75, Indira Gandhi introduced emergency. As she lost the election, see, when there was an emergency, church was very happy. As she lost the election, church was unhappy. See the irony here. Entire nation was celebrating her loss, her defeat, but church was, crying foul. Now the very bad days have come in 77. I myself as a child observed this. From then on till today, they tried all these narratives, yet failed badly, and 2014 is an example. In spite of all that, an unexpected result came to, it was a shocking. So they need to change the strategy. So this is just a change of strategy. In India, their strategies are different. In America, their strategy is different. In Europe, their strategy is different. But the aim is the same, goal is same. In India, their strategy is different. You go back to the very founders. Who are the founders? Saint Ignatius Loyola. And the co-founder is Saint Francis Xavier. Both of them believed in violence. They are strong believers in violence. So in the birth itself, in the inception itself, there is violence. So Jesuits are into violence today is not at all surprising. If you study them, if you study their history, it's not surprising. It is not the Stan Swami is not the first person. He is just inherited a certain system, and he went full-fledged. And that was the idea. To promote Christianity, you need violence. That was the basic belief of the founders themselves. It can't be by soft way. It has to be by hard way. God is just an entity, just a word they have used, misused, abused. Our political parties have to first understand very clearly, all parties. We say now when we talk about politics, we talk about Congress, BJP and all political parties. What I say is, what I see and what I have studied is, church sets the political narrative and these parties follow it. None of these parties set the political narrative. It is a church sets the political narrative and they are just the players. And church is the biggest player and no political party or no political activist knows about it, have studied about it. That's surprising for me. Even BJP is doing the same political, political correctness. We want to be politically correct. It may be morally wrong. Still, they are politically correct. So this they have to understand very clearly. And one more thing I want to say here. See, in 250 years back when British came, they came in the form of East India Company. They never came as a political force or a king like the Mughals came. How the Mughals invaded, British did not invade in that way. They came in the garb of a businessman. And what happened after ultimately, if I had told those days, see, beware of these traders, they will capture you politically, people would have mocked at me. What are you talking? You are a conspiracy theorist. But what happened later on? They captured political power, not only political power, they destroyed our civilizational values, they destroyed our culture, they destroyed our healthcare system, they destroyed our education system, they destroyed almost everything before going from here. So to that extent, they damaged us. Now people who celebrate, independence today, I would like to warn them, East India Company has not gone back. East India Company has mutated. You call virus is mutating, no? So even East India Company has mutated itself from a trader's garb to a religion. So this we have to understand very clearly. So East India Company is very much present in India in the form of church. There it was traders, here it is religion. So unless and until our Pyara central government understands this and takes some stringent actions on behalf of the people of India, it will be very difficult. During the time of CAA, I said it openly. There was anti-CAA protest all across India. And who promoted it? Church. First, in the beginning, they promoted from the background. They were at the background. Then soon they came forward. And Archbishop themselves gave statements openly to the media. So that time I came out to the media, and my group, I have a small group of people, like-minded Hindustani Christians. We released a statement saying that Bishop has said he is speaking on behalf of people of, Christians of Karnataka. I said I have a strong objection. He is not my representative. I have not elected him. He cannot speak on behalf of Christians. At the most, he can speak for himself. So that I punctured there. And I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister also. And see their audacity. The Bishop is appointed by whom? None from India. Directly, he is an appointee of the Vatican. And that man is giving political lecture in India.
Yes.
Directly he is condemning the government. Government should have asked him, who are you? You mind your own business. That government can always do. You are a foreign appointee. You have come here he may be a citizen of India. He is born here. Everything is all right. But his allegiance is any bishop in India. He may be a born citizen, but his allegiance is to the Vatican, not to the Constitution of India. That is very, very clear. That government has to take note very seriously. And whom is he reporting to? Every bishop in India is reporting to the Papal Nuncio, who is sitting in Delhi. And who is Papal Nuncio? He is an ambassador of Vatican. Just like any other country sends an ambassador, Vatican sends an ambassador in India. And these people go there and salute him. They obey him. They have taken oath to obey them. So it's a direct connection, not indirect. Directly, Vatican is ruling India. And if they set political narratives, fake narratives, counter narratives, so I can easily assume Vatican is doing it directly. Never. See, more than a messiah of poor, he called himself and others call himself as a defender of human rights. That's very important. Yes. When you are a defender of human rights, a young girl in convent is brutally murdered and thrown into the well. You are bound to make a statement on that. He never spoke on that. Another nun who stood by the victim of rape of a bishop, she is being victimized now. And this defender of human rights, the so-called defender, never spoke a single word. Forget the people who are shouting on his behalf now or for him, they also did not speak a single word. All these people who are talking for Stan Swami now, none of them speak for Sister Abhaya, nor for Sister Lucy, nor for that victim of Bishop Franco Mulakal. So this human rights also has some, different strange groups maybe. Yes, I am a practicing Catholic and also a member of my own community. And also I am a citizen. So I have different roles here. And I am a responsible citizen, political and social activist. So as a community member, when I see at look at things, who is the enemy of my community? Right from childhood, we have been taught we have enemies outside. People are attacking us. We have to be careful. But as I grew up and I started analyzing, who is my enemy? And I find there is no outside enemy at all. The enemy is within. The church is my enemy. My own members, community members have suffered very badly in the hands of church. I can give n number of examples. Very badly suffered in the hands of church. So who is the enemy? Our own church. This is what I'm saying. So whatever I do is in the interest of my community. For safeguard the victims of the church within Christian community. Then of course there are victims outside also. Other than Christians also there are victims of church. But there are enough victims inside the church. I'm working for them. See, broad daylight at 2 o'clock, again, Jesuit Padre, a Jesuit institute in Mangalore, St. Aloysius College. There is a house touching their compound. One John Baptist was living there. Broad daylight, they go there, they pull him out of the house, they tie him down and demolish his house. His daughters had gone to the work. And they, by these earth mover machines, within no time, they demolish the house and, they expand their compound, college compound. They wanted to grab the land. So they tried all these civil cases and all cases going on in the court. But they have advisor and advocate. He said, first you demolish the house, then it will be easy to win the case in the court. So there no house existed there. How do you do this? Broad daylight, 2 o'clock, they do this. And padris were present there. His advocate was present. And of course, police can't close the eyes. They have to book some case. So police came reluctantly. And what did they do? These coolies and these earth mover drivers, they booked as culprits. And none of these padris are scot-free. What does it show? Only those coolies are the people who demolished the house. They came on a payment, on a daily wage. This happened in the heart of the city of Mangaluru. I can give many examples like this. This is one example because you asked for one. This is one. Now you may say one John Baptist, he may be wrong. All right. In another one place, there are 270 houses in one colony. So all of them are troubled by the bishop himself. In another place, there are 130 houses of Christians. Again, the church is troubling them. Christians very much Catholic Christians. They won't listen to that Padri's sermon. They will hear someone other Padri because after all, he is a messenger of God. I am trying to tell them for a long time. Now they are realizing. 10 years back when I said, they were saying, what are you talking there? He's a man of God. You shouldn't talk like that about that. But they say what you said is right. What you said is right, but don't talk publicly, talk within the community. So that condition. One example I'll give you. In the mid 80s, there was a narrative. In the city of Bombay, that time it was Bombay, now it is Mumbai. It was more, people are using it. Garv se kaho hum Hindu hain. And Shiv Sena was promoting in a big way. Garv se kaho hum Hindu hain. Now this church got rattled by it. So it wanted to create everybody, not only the church, everybody got rattled. They wanted to create a fake narrative. The counter narrative, counter to this. You know what they created? Pyar se kaho hum insan hain. Their narrative was Garv se kaho hum Hindu hai. So these people started putting, writings on the wall as Pyar se kaho hum insan hai. Now you may ask, how do you say church promoted it? One of the priests told me this. Otherwise, I didn't know. I was a student during that time in the mid 80s. One padre told me church made this narrative. And that padre is not a common padre. As on today, he is a bishop. So he was very much in that, in this setup. See, you see this narrative. See how beautifully they do. प्यार से a typical Hindu, before a typical Hindu plays both these narratives. गर्व से कहो हम हिंदू हैं and प्यार से कहो हम इंसान हैं. The typical Hindu chooses the second one. प्यार से कहो हम इंसान हैं. So that means they have studied the Hindu manas. We call no Hindu mindset so thoroughly studied. Even the Hindu leaders have not studied so much. And this is how they make the counter narrative so powerfully, and how people get bogged down. It is purely psychological manipulation. See a child born, a fresh child born, till that person grows into old and dies, even after his death, even till his burial, the church controls everything. From birth, even up to the burial, everything is controlled by the church. The newborn baby is to be named. So you have to go to the padre and ask him. You can't name it as your own, at your own choice. You have to take an appointment with him according to his time. He will fix the time and date. Then your naming ceremony, your christening ceremony goes together. So the day the child is baptized, the child is named also. From then on, the control starts. His death, you have to inform the church padre. He will decide when he should be buried. You can't decide of your own. Your marriage, he decides. The boy and girl and his family all agree for a marriage. We fix a date, but padre says that date is not possible. You have to do it on this date. I am the officer conducting the marriage. You have to listen to me. Yes, you have to listen to him. So who controls? Your marriages are controlled by them. Your naming ceremony is controlled by them. Your funeral is controlled by them. Whether you should be buried in the cemetery or not is decided by him. So to that extent they control. So how long can you run away? As a youth, even if you turn against the church and become a revolutionary, as you grow old, as you advance in age, you start realizing, "Arey, tomorrow if I die, what will be my last rites? I have to surrender before the Padre." If you talk too much, like me, you may not be buried in the cemetery, church cemetery. There they'll put a blog. He was not a practicing Catholic, he was talking against the church. So I myself, opt out, I myself said, don't bury me in the cemetery. I don't prefer it personally. I prefer to be, cremated, yes. As a citizen, I have a responsibility. I feel, when you are born in this world with some mission, and if you died like a dog on the street, it's of no use. You live like a human being.